You are a fraud. The words cracked through the ballroom so sharply that every conversation stopped at once. Hundreds of guests turned toward the sound. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. Soft music faded into an uneasy silence. At the center of the annual Veterans Support Foundation Gala stood Nathan Brooks, a single father in a simple navy suit that looked older than most of the designer jackets surrounding him. Across from him stood Vanessa Caldwell, the celebrated chief executive officer whose name appeared regularly on business magazines and television interviews. Her expression was calm, but her voice carried enough confidence to command the entire room. I knew something did not add up, she continued. People like you always have a story. A former military hero, a humble businessman, a devoted father. It is the perfect package. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others leaned closer, eager to hear more. Nathan remained still. His hands rested calmly at his sides. He did not raise his voice. He did not defend himself. He simply looked at Vanessa with quiet patience. That only seemed to irritate her more. You expect everyone to believe it, she said. But there are no headlines about you. No interviews. No public records anyone can find. Just stories. A few nervous laughs emerged from the crowd. Not many, but enough. Near the back of the ballroom, 11-year-old Emily Brooks felt her stomach tighten. She stood beside a refreshment table, clutching a small program booklet. She had begged her father to attend the gala. The foundation was honoring local community leaders, and several friends had encouraged Nathan to accept an invitation. Now she wished they had stayed home. Nathan finally spoke. His voice was calm and steady. You are entitled to your opinion. Vanessa crossed her arms. That is not a denial. More whispers spread through the room. Cameras from local media crews slowly turned toward them. Several guests discreetly lifted their phones. The evening had suddenly become far more interesting than anyone expected. Nathan noticed Emily watching. For a brief moment, his eyes met hers. He offered a small smile. The kind fathers use when they want their children to know everything will be all right even when it clearly is not. Emily tried to smile back. It was difficult. The ballroom felt colder now. The golden lights reflected against polished marble floors while guests watched the confrontation unfold. Vanessa stepped forward. The foundation invited you because people claim you served your country with distinction. They claim you sacrificed more than most. Yet nobody seems able to verify any of it. Nathan remained silent. Nothing to say? She asked. Still silence. A man near the front shook his head. Maybe she has a point. Another guest nodded slowly. It is strange. The comments spread like ripples through water. Nathan heard them all, yet his expression never changed. There was no anger, no embarrassment, only a quiet dignity that seemed oddly out of place in a room increasingly hungry for drama. Emily could not understand it. If someone accused her of lying, she would defend herself immediately. Why was her father standing there saying nothing? Vanessa appeared convinced she had won. People deserve the truth, she announced to the room. Especially at an event meant to honor genuine service and sacrifice. A few guests applauded politely. Nathan lowered his gaze for a moment. Then he looked back at her. I agree. The simple answer caught several people off guard. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. Good. Then perhaps tonight we will finally get it. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Somewhere near the rear entrance, an elderly man in a dark suit suddenly froze. He had been arriving late, and had only heard the last few moments of the exchange. When he heard Nathan Brooks' name spoken aloud, the color drained from his face. He stared across the ballroom as if he had just seen a ghost. Nobody noticed him. Nobody paid attention as he quietly reached for his phone with trembling hands. His voice lowered to almost a whisper. Sir, he said into the receiver, you need to come here immediately. Across the room, Nathan still stood alone beneath the chandeliers while the crowd questioned his character. Yet far away, a chain of events had already begun. And before this night was over, the same people who doubted him would find themselves standing in complete silence. Nathan Brooks left the ballroom shortly after the confrontation, not because he was angry, but because he saw the strain in Emily's face. The gala continued behind them as guests returned to their conversations, though the whispers never fully disappeared. Some believed Vanessa Caldwell had exposed a fraud. Others were unsure. Most simply enjoyed the drama. Nathan guided Emily through the hotel lobby and into the cool evening air. The city lights shimmered across the streets beyond the parking lot. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Emily finally looked up at her father. "Why did you let her say those things?" Nathan smiled gently. "Because arguing would not have changed her mind." Emily frowned. "But they were not true." Nathan nodded. "I know. Then why not tell everyone?" He opened the passenger door of his aging pickup truck and waited until she climbed inside. Only after closing the door did he answer. "Respect is not something you demand from people. It is something they choose when they are ready." Emily stared through the windshield as they pulled away from the hotel. She wanted to understand. She really did. But she was 11 years old, and watching someone insult her father in front of hundreds of people felt impossible to accept. The drive home took nearly 40 minutes. Nathan spent most of it listening to Emily talk about school, her science project, and a field trip planned for the following month. He encouraged her excitement exactly as he always did. By the time they reached their small house outside town, some of the tension had faded. Their home sat at the end of a quiet road bordered by oak trees and open fields. It was not large. It was not impressive, but it was theirs. Nathan unlocked the front door while Emily hurried inside. Family photographs lined the hallway walls. Some were old, some were recent. Nearly all of them included the same two people, a father and a daughter finding ways to smile through every season of life. Nathan paused briefly beside one photograph of his late wife. The frame showed her standing between him and a much younger Emily. The memory softened his expression. "Long day?" Emily asked from the kitchen. Nathan smiled. "A little." Later that evening, after homework was finished and dinner dishes were cleaned, Emily wandered into the detached garage behind the house. She found Nathan sitting quietly beside a wooden workbench. The familiar scent of motor oil, sawdust, and old metal filled the room. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could think, a place where he could remember. Emily noticed something sitting on the corner shelf, an old wooden box covered in dust. She had seen it before but never opened it. "What is in there?" she asked. Nathan glanced toward the box. For a brief moment, something passed across his face. Not fear, not regret, something deeper. Old memories. Emily stepped closer. "Can I see?" Nathan hesitated. Then he slowly shook his head. "Not tonight." Emily accepted the answer, though her curiosity remained. The box looked ordinary, yet the way her father watched it suggested otherwise. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. The garage lights cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Nathan eventually stood and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Time for bed." Emily nodded and headed toward the house. Nathan remained behind for several minutes. Once alone, he walked over to the shelf and carefully lifted the wooden box. He opened it only slightly, just enough to glimpse what rested inside. Several medals, a folded flag, old photographs, and documents that connected him to a life he rarely discussed. After a long silence, he closed the lid again. Meanwhile, miles away in the city, the elderly man from the gala sat in his office, staring at a phone. He had made 3 calls already. None had been returned. Then finally the screen lit up. The man stood immediately. "Sir," he said, "I found him." A pause followed. The elderly man listened carefully. Then he nodded. "Yes, sir. Nathan Brooks." Another pause. This time his eyes widened. "Tomorrow?" he asked quietly. He listened once more before ending the call. For several seconds he simply stood there staring into space. Then he whispered words nobody else could hear. "They have no idea who they humiliated tonight." Nathan woke before sunrise the next morning, just as he always did. The world outside remained quiet while a pale orange glow stretched across the horizon beyond the fields. He brewed coffee, packed Emily's lunch, and reviewed a list of repairs waiting for him at his small equipment shop. If anyone had seen him that morning, they would never have guessed he had become the center of controversy less than 12 hours earlier. He moved through the kitchen with the same calm rhythm he carried into every day. Emily eventually appeared, still sleepy, her backpack hanging from one shoulder. "Do you think people are still talking about last night?" she asked. Nathan smiled as he handed her a plate of pancakes. "Probably." Emily sat down. "Does that bother you?" Nathan shook his head. "People are allowed to have opinions. Even wrong opinions." Nathan laughed softly. "Especially those." Emily rolled her eyes. Sometimes her father had a way of answering questions without really answering them. After breakfast, Nathan drove her to school before heading toward his shop. The small building sat on the edge of town beside a grain supply warehouse. Farmers trusted him because he fixed things properly. Ranchers trusted him because he never charged more than necessary. Most customers knew him as a dependable mechanic and a good father. Very few knew anything about the years before he arrived in town. As he unlocked the front door, his friend and employee, Mark Sullivan, was already waiting outside. "You have become famous," Mark said immediately. Nathan groaned. "That bad?" Mark held up his phone. A video clip from the gala played across the screen. Vanessa Caldwell's accusation had already gathered hundreds of thousands of views online. Comment sections were filled with arguments. Some people defended Nathan. Others agreed with Vanessa. Most simply enjoyed taking sides. Nathan handed the phone back. "Looks exhausting." Mark stared at him. "That is your reaction?" Nathan shrugged. "The tractors still need repairs." Mark shook his head in disbelief. The morning continued normally until shortly after 10 o'clock. A customer arrived to pick up a repaired irrigation pump. Another dropped off equipment needing maintenance. Life moved forward exactly as it always had. Yet beneath the surface, something felt different. Several visitors looked at Nathan more carefully than usual. A few seemed tempted to ask questions. None did. Meanwhile, across town, Emily sat through math class while her mind drifted elsewhere. During lunch, two students approached her table. "Was that your dad in the video?" one asked. Emily nodded cautiously. The student hesitated. "For what it is worth, I think that lady was wrong." Emily smiled. "Thank you." Back at the shop, Nathan spent part of the afternoon organizing inventory in a storage room behind the main work area. While moving several boxes, he uncovered an old metal container he had not opened in years. He stared at it quietly. Inside were photographs from another chapter of his life. Team pictures, training certificates, letters from people he had not seen in a very long time. For a moment, memories returned with surprising clarity. The faces, the places, the promises. Then he closed the container and returned it to the shelf. The past remained where it belonged. Around 3 o'clock, a black sedan pulled into the parking lot. Nathan noticed it through the office window. The vehicle looked expensive and completely out of place among the tractors and pickup trucks normally parked outside. An older man stepped out. Well-dressed. Serious expression. Nathan recognized him immediately. It was the same man who had been standing near the rear of the ballroom the previous evening. The visitor entered the shop and removed his sunglasses. "Nathan Brooks?" he asked. Nathan nodded. "That is me." The man extended his hand. "My name is Walter Hayes. We met years ago, though I doubt you remember." Nathan studied him carefully. Then recognition slowly appeared. "Walter." The man smiled. "It has been a long time." Nathan glanced toward the empty customer area. "What brings you here?" Walter's expression became serious again. He lowered his voice. "Someone very important is looking for you." Nathan immediately understood this was not a casual visit. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected across the parking lot. Inside, the quiet shop suddenly felt much smaller. And for the first time since the gala, Nathan realized that the past he worked so hard to leave behind might finally be catching up with him. Nathan studied Walter Hayes for several seconds before gesturing toward the small office in the corner of the shop. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the dusty windows while the distant sound of farm equipment echoed from outside. Walter closed the office door behind them and remained standing. Something about his posture suggested urgency. Nathan noticed it immediately. "Who is looking for me?" he asked. Walter exhaled slowly. "General Robert Whitaker." The room became very quiet. Nathan lowered his eyes for a moment. It was the first visible reaction Walter had seen from him all day. "Robert?" Nathan asked softly. Walter nodded. He saw the video from the gala. Nathan leaned back in his chair. "I was hoping he would not." Walter almost laughed. "That was never going to happen." Nathan said nothing. The silence between them carried years of history. Walter sat down across from him. "He wants to see you." Nathan looked toward the office window where tractors sat waiting for repair. "I am not interested in revisiting old stories." Walter folded his hands. "This is not about old stories anymore." Nathan already knew what he meant. The video from the gala had spread far beyond their town. Local news stations were replaying it. Online commentators debated it. Thousands of strangers had formed opinions about a man they had never met. Yet none of that seemed to bother Nathan. What bothered him was the possibility that people from his past would be pulled into it. "How much does he know?" Nathan asked. Walter smiled faintly. "Everything." Nathan closed his eyes briefly. That answer did not surprise him. If anyone knew the truth, it was Robert Whitaker. Several moments passed before Walter spoke again. The general is attending the foundation's closing ceremony tomorrow evening. Nathan looked up. Walter continued, and he intends to be there in person. Nathan immediately understood the implication. The gala had not ended the previous night. Another public event remained scheduled for the following evening. More guests, more media, more attention. Exactly the kind of environment he preferred to avoid. That is his decision, Nathan replied calmly. Walter leaned forward. Nathan, people are questioning your character publicly. Nathan shrugged. People have questioned worse. Walter shook his head. You still do not understand. Nathan smiled slightly. No, Walter. I understand perfectly. The older man stared at him. Nathan's calmness was both admirable and frustrating. Most people would have been angry. Most people would have demanded an apology. Nathan simply returned his attention to repairing equipment and taking care of his daughter. Outside the office, Mark continued working while pretending not to listen. After another few minutes, Walter finally stood. The general asked me to give you a message. Nathan remained silent. Walter repeated the words carefully. Honor does not belong to the people who talk about it. It belongs to the people who live it. For the first time, a genuine smile appeared on Nathan's face. That sounds like Robert. Walter nodded. He remembers everything. After Walter left, Nathan returned to work. He spent the remainder of the afternoon replacing hydraulic components on a large tractor. Grease covered his hands. Tools clattered against metal surfaces. For several hours, life felt normal again. Yet his thoughts occasionally drifted toward the upcoming ceremony, toward Robert Whitaker, toward memories he had spent years trying to leave behind. That evening, Emily noticed immediately that something was different. They sat together at the kitchen table while she finished homework. You look like you are thinking about something, she said. Nathan smiled. Maybe a little. Emily lowered her pencil. Is it because of the lady from the gala? Nathan shook his head. Not exactly. Then what? He considered the question. Sometimes the past has a way of finding you when you least expect it. Emily looked confused. Nathan laughed softly. Do not worry about it. Later that night, after Emily went to bed, Nathan stepped into the garage once more. The old wooden box remained on the shelf exactly where he left it. He stared at it for a long time before finally opening it. Inside rested medals, photographs, and memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Near the bottom lay a picture of several younger men standing together beside a military transport aircraft. Nathan's eyes settled on one familiar face. Robert Whitaker. Back then, neither of them imagined how much life would change. Nathan carefully returned the photograph to the box and closed the lid. Outside, the night air remained still. Somewhere far away, preparations were already being made for tomorrow's ceremony. And while most people expected another public debate, a very different kind of reunion was about to unfold. Nathan arrived at the foundation's closing ceremony the following evening with the same quiet composure he carried everywhere else. The venue was larger than the previous gala, and the attention surrounding the event had multiplied overnight. News vans lined the entrance. Reporters stood near the doors. Guests whispered as they entered the building. Many recognized Nathan immediately from the viral videos circulating online. Some looked at him with sympathy, others with skepticism. A few simply stared. Through it all, Nathan remained focused on Emily. She walked beside him wearing a simple blue dress, trying her best to ignore the curious glances. Inside the grand ballroom, the atmosphere felt different from before. The room was beautiful. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across white tablecloths and polished floors. A military honor display stood near the stage. American flags rested beside banners supporting veterans and their families. Yet beneath the elegant setting, tension lingered. Everyone seemed to know something important might happen that evening. Vanessa Caldwell noticed Nathan almost immediately. She stood near a group of executives discussing the previous night's controversy. Conversations softened as he entered. Several people turned to watch him cross the room. Vanessa maintained her confident posture, but she felt something she had not experienced before. Uncertainty. The public reaction to the video had not unfolded as she expected. Instead of celebrating her accusations, many people had begun questioning whether they truly knew the full story. Nathan greeted a few foundation volunteers and found a table near the back of the ballroom. Emily sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. They simply listened to the growing hum of conversations around them. Finally, Emily leaned closer. Do you think he is coming? Nathan knew exactly who she meant. He smiled faintly. If Robert said he would be here, he will be here. Emily nodded. The certainty in her father's voice surprised her. There were not many people in the world he spoke about that way. Across the room, Vanessa continued observing Nathan. What bothered her most was not his silence. It was his lack of resentment. Most people publicly accused of dishonesty would be angry, defensive, eager to prove themselves. Nathan seemed interested in none of those things. The evening program began shortly afterward. Foundation leaders welcomed guests and thanked donors. Several veterans received recognition for community service projects. Applause filled the room at regular intervals. Yet everyone sensed that attention remained fixed elsewhere. People were waiting, watching, wondering. About halfway through the ceremony, Emily finally asked the question she had been holding back for days. "Dad." Nathan turned toward her. "Yes." She hesitated. "Why do you never tell people what you did?" Nathan studied the stage lights for a moment before answering. "Because the people who mattered already knew." Emily looked confused. Nathan smiled gently. "And the people who did not know never owed me anything." She considered that answer carefully. It sounded like something her mother would have said. Around them, conversations paused as movement appeared near the ballroom entrance. Several guests turned simultaneously. Then more followed. A subtle ripple moved through the room. Foundation organizers exchanged quick glances. Security personnel straightened their posture. Even the speakers on stage seemed distracted. Nathan noticed it too. He lowered his coffee cup and looked toward the entrance. Vanessa followed the crowd's attention. The ballroom gradually grew quieter. Nobody announced anything. Nobody explained what was happening. Yet the reaction continued spreading. Table by table, person by person. Emily noticed it next. "Dad?" she whispered. Nathan remained silent. Near the doorway, several distinguished military officers had entered the ballroom. Their presence alone commanded respect. Conversations faded almost completely now. Guests stood to get a better look. Reporters hurried toward the rear of the room. Cameras lifted. Foundation board members moved quickly to greet the arriving delegation. At the center of the group walked a tall, white-haired man whose bearing immediately drew attention. Nathan recognized him before anyone else reached him. Across the crowded ballroom, their eyes met for the first time in years. And for the first time since the accusations began, Nathan Brooks felt the past standing directly in front of him. Nathan remained seated as the military delegation moved through the ballroom. Around him, guests stood respectfully, creating a path toward the front of the room. The atmosphere had changed completely. Only minutes earlier, people had been exchanging quiet rumors and debating old accusations. Now nobody seemed interested in speaking at all. General Robert Whitaker walked with calm confidence, acknowledging greetings from Foundation leaders while keeping his attention fixed on one person, Nathan Brooks. Emily felt her heart racing. She had never met the general before, but she immediately understood that he was important. More than important, the entire room seemed to react to his presence. Reporters moved closer. Cameras turned. Executives straightened their posture. Even Vanessa Caldwell looked uncertain for the first time since the controversy began. The general eventually reached the front of the ballroom, where organizers welcomed him onto the stage. Applause filled the room. He thanked them politely and accepted a brief introduction. The audience listened carefully. Some expected a speech about service. Others expected comments about veterans. Nobody expected what happened next. General Whitaker stepped to the podium and looked across the ballroom. His eyes found Nathan immediately. The room followed his gaze. Silence spread. "Before I say anything else tonight," the general began, "there is someone in this room I have been hoping to see." Guests exchanged curious glances. Nathan lowered his eyes slightly. Emily looked from her father to the stage. The general continued, "I was informed that this individual has recently been the subject of public discussion." The words hung in the air. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa felt every eye gradually turning toward her. General Whitaker paused. Then he spoke a name. Nathan Brooks. The ballroom became perfectly still. Hundreds of faces turned toward the back of the room where Nathan sat beside his daughter. Foundation leaders looked surprised. Reporters immediately lifted their cameras. Yet Nathan remained exactly as he had been all evening. Quiet, calm, unmoved by attention. The general stepped away from the podium. Nobody understood why at first. Then he began walking through the ballroom, one step at a time, straight toward Nathan. The crowd parted naturally. Nobody wanted to miss what was happening. Emily watched in disbelief. Vanessa stared without blinking. Nathan slowly rose from his chair as the general approached. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Years of shared history seemed to exist in that silence. Then something happened that nobody in the room expected. General Robert Whitaker came to a stop directly in front of Nathan Brooks. His shoulders straightened. His posture became formal. And before hundreds of stunned guests, the three-star general raised his hand in a precise military salute. A gasp swept through the ballroom. Several people actually stood frozen in place. Cameras flashed. Reporters forgot to take notes. For a moment, the room seemed unable to process what it had witnessed. One of the highest-ranking officers in the country was saluting a man who had been publicly accused of dishonesty only a day earlier. Nathan looked genuinely uncomfortable with the attention. Yet after a brief hesitation, he returned the salute respectfully. The silence deepened. General Whitaker lowered his hand. His voice remained steady when he finally spoke. "It is good to see you again, Nathan." Nathan smiled faintly. "Good to see you too, Robert." The familiarity between them only increased the crowd's confusion. Vanessa felt her certainty slipping away. Nothing about this scene matched the assumptions she had built. General Whitaker turned toward Emily. His expression softened immediately. "You must be Emily." She nodded nervously. The general smiled. "Your father talks about you more than anyone else." Emily glanced up at Nathan, surprised. A few guests smiled at the exchange. Then the general faced the audience once more. His expression grew serious. "I understand there have been questions regarding this man's character." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. "Allow me to be perfectly clear." The general's voice carried across the ballroom without effort. "I have served with remarkable people throughout my career. Men and women of extraordinary integrity. Nathan Brooks belongs among the finest of them." The room fell into complete silence. Not the silence of doubt. The silence of realization. And for the first time since the accusations began, the balance of the entire story had shifted. Nobody spoke for several seconds after General Whitaker's statement. The silence felt almost physical. Guests sat frozen in their seats. Reporters lowered their microphones. Even the foundation organizers seemed uncertain whether to continue the program. Across the ballroom, Vanessa Caldwell stared at Nathan Brooks as though she were seeing him for the first time. The confident assumptions she carried into the room were beginning to collapse beneath the weight of reality. General Whitaker remained standing beside Nathan. His expression was calm, but there was unmistakable conviction in his eyes. He looked toward the audience and spoke again. "Many years ago, I learned something important about character." The room listened carefully. The people who talk the least about their sacrifices are often the people who sacrifice the most. Several veterans in attendance slowly nodded. Nathan lowered his gaze. He had never been comfortable when conversations turned toward his past. General Whitaker noticed immediately. "And that is exactly why Nathan never told you himself." The general turned toward him and smiled. "You always hated attention." A few soft laughs moved through the audience. Nathan smiled faintly. "Some things never change." The general looked back at the crowd. "What has changed is that too many people have forgotten who this man is." Emily sat perfectly still. Every word felt like a missing piece of a puzzle she had been trying to solve her entire life. She knew her father was kind. She knew he worked hard. She knew he always helped people. But there was clearly an entire chapter she had never seen. General Whitaker stepped toward the stage once more. A Foundation volunteer quickly adjusted the microphone. The general paused for a moment before continuing. "Several years ago, there was a difficult mission involving a small team operating under extreme circumstances." The room became even quieter. "I will not discuss classified details, because many aspects remain protected. What I can tell you is this. The success of that mission depended upon trust, leadership, and extraordinary courage." Nathan closed his eyes briefly. He already knew where this was going. Among that team was a man who repeatedly placed the needs of others above his own comfort, his own career, and his own recognition. The general looked directly at Nathan. That man was Nathan Brooks. Several people exchanged stunned glances. Reporters hurriedly scribbled notes. Cameras remained fixed on Nathan's face. Yet the single father standing near the back of the ballroom seemed more interested in avoiding attention than receiving it. The general continued. When opportunities for advancement appeared afterward, Nathan walked away from them. Vanessa frowned slightly. That detail surprised her. Most ambitious people chase promotions. Nathan had apparently done the opposite. He could have built an extraordinary public career, the general said. Instead, he chose family. He chose responsibility. He chose a quieter life. Emily felt tears gathering in her eyes. She thought about every school concert he attended, every science fair, every soccer game, every bedtime story. The sacrifices she saw suddenly carried deeper meaning. Nathan had not simply been present. He had chosen to be present. General Whitaker reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded photograph. Time had faded its edges. He held it up for the audience to see. This picture was taken years ago. A large screen displayed the image overhead. The crowd immediately leaned forward. The photograph showed a younger Nathan standing beside several military personnel, including a younger Robert Whitaker. Everyone in the picture was smiling. "I have carried this photograph for a long time," the general said softly. "Not because of what we accomplished, because of the kind of man standing in it." The room fell silent again. Not because people were shocked anymore, because they were beginning to understand. Nathan was not respected because of titles, not because of awards, not because of military history. He was respected because of who he had remained after all those years. A devoted father, a humble citizen, a man whose dignity never depended on recognition. General Whitaker carefully folded the photograph and looked toward the audience one final time. If you want to measure a person's worth, do not ask how loudly they speak about themselves. He paused. Ask the people whose lives are better because that person showed up when it mattered. And as those words settled over the ballroom, more than one guest realized they had judged Nathan Brooks without ever truly knowing him. The ballroom remained silent long after General Whitaker finished speaking. It was no longer the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence that comes when people realize they have misunderstood someone completely. The giant room seemed smaller now, as though every guest had been drawn into the same moment of reflection. Nathan stood quietly beside Emily, uncomfortable with the attention yet unwilling to interrupt the general. Across the room, Vanessa Caldwell felt a weight settling in her chest. The certainty that had fueled her accusations was gone. In its place stood something much harder to ignore: regret. She replayed the previous evening in her mind. The accusations, the assumptions, the confidence with which she judged a man she had never truly known. General Whitaker stepped away from the microphone and walked back toward Nathan. His expression softened. "You always hated these situations," he said quietly. Nathan smiled faintly. "You always seem to enjoy them too much." A few guests laughed gently. The tension in the room eased for the first time all evening. Emily looked up at her father. She had never seen so many people looking at him with admiration. Yet he seemed exactly the same as he had been that morning. Exactly the same as he had been her entire life. The realization brought tears to her eyes. The remarkable person everyone was discovering had always been there. She simply had not known the full story. One of the reporters finally raised a hand. "General Whitaker, may I ask a question?" The general nodded. "You may." The reporter glanced toward Nathan. "If Mr. Brooks accomplished so much, why have most people never heard of him?" The answer came immediately. "Because he never wanted them to." Murmurs moved through the audience. The reporter looked surprised. General Whitaker continued. "Some people spend their lives pursuing recognition. Nathan spent his life pursuing responsibility." He gestured toward Emily. After his wife passed away, he chose to focus on raising his daughter. He walked away from opportunities many people dream about. Several guests lowered their eyes. The answer felt both simple and profound. Nathan had not disappeared because he failed. He disappeared because he chose something he valued more. Emily reached for her father's hand beneath the table. Nathan squeezed it gently. The gesture lasted only a second, but General Whitaker noticed. So did many others. The general smiled. "That right there tells you everything you need to know." Vanessa slowly rose from her seat. The movement immediately drew attention. Conversation stopped. Cameras turned toward her. She hesitated for a moment before walking across the ballroom. Each step seemed heavier than the last. When she finally reached Nathan, the room became completely silent once again. She looked at him directly. For the first time since anyone met her, there was no executive confidence in her voice. Only honesty. "Nathan," she said quietly, "I was wrong." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Vanessa continued. "I judged you without knowing your story. I questioned your character without understanding your sacrifices. and I allowed my assumptions to become accusations. Nathan listened patiently. The room waited. Vanessa lowered her gaze briefly. I owe you an apology. The words carried through the ballroom. There was no defensiveness, no attempt to justify her actions, just accountability. Nathan remained silent for a moment. Then he smiled gently. Thank you. The simplicity of his response surprised many people. No anger, no demand for revenge, no desire to embarrass her publicly. Just grace. Vanessa looked genuinely relieved. General Whitaker watched the exchange with quiet approval. He had seen many people talk about honor throughout his career. Moments like this reminded him what honor actually looked like. It was not found in medals or titles. It was found in humility, in responsibility, in forgiveness. As the evening continued, something remarkable happened. Guests stopped talking about controversy. They stopped discussing accusations. Instead, they spoke about character, about service, about the choices people make when nobody is watching. And throughout it all, Nathan Brooks remained exactly who he had always been. A devoted father, a humble man, a person whose dignity never depended on public recognition. The crowd had come searching for a scandal. Instead, they had discovered a lesson. And as the final applause slowly filled the ballroom, more than one person realized they would remember that lesson long after the evening ended. The ceremony ended nearly an hour later, but many guests remained in the ballroom long after the official program concluded. Something about the evening had touched them in a way they did not expect. Conversations felt different now, softer, more thoughtful. The accusations that once dominated every discussion had disappeared. In their place remained respect. Nathan Brooks stood near one of the large windows overlooking the city lights while Emily spoke with several Foundation volunteers. General Whitaker joined him quietly. For a few moments, neither man said anything. They simply watched the lights shimmering beyond the glass. Finally, the general smiled. You handled all of this better than I would have. Nathan laughed softly. That is because you have always enjoyed making speeches. Robert shook his head. And you have always preferred silence. Nathan looked toward Emily. She was smiling, truly smiling. Not the nervous smile she wore at the beginning of the week. Not the worried smile she carried after the accusations. This was different. It was pride. The kind that comes from finally understanding who someone really is. She knows now, Robert said. Nathan nodded. Yes. The general followed his gaze. That matters more than anything else. It did. Nathan never cared about headlines. He never cared about public recognition. The approval of strangers had never been his goal. But knowing that Emily now understood the sacrifices made on her behalf felt different. It felt important. Across the ballroom, Vanessa Caldwell approached slowly. This time there were no cameras nearby, no reporters, no audience waiting for a reaction. Just three people standing together. Vanessa looked at Nathan. I wanted to thank you. Nathan seemed surprised. For what? She smiled faintly. For accepting my apology with more grace than I deserved. Nathan shook his head gently. We all make mistakes. Vanessa looked down for a moment. Not all mistakes become public. Nathan considered that. Then he smiled. That just means we have to learn from them faster. Even Robert laughed at that. The tension that once existed between them was gone. Not because the past had been erased. Because forgiveness had made it smaller. Eventually guests began leaving the ballroom. Tables were cleared. Lights dimmed. Volunteers packed decorations into storage boxes. The evening slowly came to an end. Emily finally walked over and slipped her hand into her father's. Ready to go home? She asked. Nathan smiled. More than ready. They said goodbye to General Whitaker and headed toward the exit. As they reached the doorway, Robert called after them. Nathan turned. The general stood beneath the soft ballroom lights with the same proud expression he carried throughout the evening. For what it is worth, Robert said, I was always more impressed by the father you became than anything you accomplished before that. Nathan's eyes softened. He nodded once. No speech. No dramatic reply. Just understanding. Sometimes the most important words require the fewest answers. The drive home was quiet. Emily spent most of it looking out the window at the passing lights. Eventually she spoke. Dad, yes. I think Mom would be proud of you. Nathan felt emotion rise unexpectedly in his chest. For a moment he could not answer. Then he smiled. I hope so. Emily squeezed his hand. Nothing more needed to be said. When they arrived home, the familiar house felt warmer somehow. The kitchen light glowed softly. Family photographs lined the hallway exactly where they always had. Life had not changed overnight. Nathan would still wake early. He would still repair equipment. He would still pack lunches and help with homework. The extraordinary thing was that none of those ordinary moments seemed small anymore. They were the very reason he made the choices he did. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Nathan stepped into the garage one final time. The old wooden box remained on the shelf. He opened it carefully and looked at the medals, photographs, and memories resting inside. For years they had represented a chapter of life he rarely discussed. Tonight felt different. Not because the contents had changed, because he no longer felt the need to hide them. He closed the lid gently and smiled. Then he turned off the light and walked back toward the house where his daughter slept peacefully. Outside, the night was quiet. Inside, there was peace. And perhaps that was the real reward. Not applause, not recognition, not vindication. Just the simple knowledge that character endures when opinions fade, that dignity speaks even when words are absent, and that the people who matter most eventually see the truth. If this story reminded you of someone whose quiet strength shaped your life, share their story in the comments. And if you believe honor, kindness, and second chances still matter, we would be grateful to have you join us again for another journey.